Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show, live from the Hold Their Feet to the Fire event, sponsored by FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform here. And you can check them out, by the way, at FAIR Immigration, or at fairus.org, and at fairimigration.org throughout this event. We're going to be here today and tomorrow. And I tell you what I'm going to do. We're going to get you in here for a second. Okay, we're going to get two for the price of one here for a moment. And this is about as quick a switch around as you're ever going to see. I've got Congressman Scott Perry here, and we've got Congressman Lou Barletta here, both at the same time in the same place. Pretty darned incredible, I think. Probably the first time in human history this has happened, right? So good morning to both. Scott, good morning to you.
Good morning, sir.
Lou, good morning to you.
Morning, Gary. Nice to see you again.
And both guys, I think, pretty good friends, and I don't know money to either one, so I think we're in pretty good shape. But it's good to have you both on here for a bit.
It is. It's great, and it's great to be with Lou, a great partner on Homeland Security and someone who has lived it at the executive level, this immigration situation, and he's got a wonderful story.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you, Gary, honestly, there are a lot of great members here in Congress, but this guy's at the top of the list, someone who fought for this country and brings those values here to Washington, and I watch him work. And there's not a day that he's not in there fighting for this country. So it's an honor for me to work with him.
You know, I'll tell you both, and you know I don't pull a lot of punches, but one of the things we talk to people about a lot is we don't hear enough of the voices like you guys. You know, we get to hear the Harry Reids talking out there and, thank God, retiring. We get to hear other people out there all the time. They say that the 10 most dangerous feet in the world are the 10 feet between a camera and Chuck Schumer. You know, we get to see those guys all the time, the Lindsey Grahams, the John McCains. Fine. But we don't get to hear the people there that are regular folk that I've known for a long time, like you, Scott. And again, thank you for your service. And to you, Mayor, thank you for your service, where I met you for the first time in the halls of Hazleton. You guys have to break through. I mean, guys like you have to break through, because there's this feeling, as you well know, and you look at the congressional ratings and the polls, Congress not liked a whole lot. But I think we heard more of the voices of people who are toiling away, who are down rowing the boat where the other ones are up there beating the drum and screaming, I think we'd be a lot better off in this country. Your thoughts?
Well, the rank and file members who you don't see a lot are in there pitching every day. It's where the rubber meets the road, and we've got to overcome a lot. We've got to overcome a culture that has sent many people here to Washington who are more concerned about getting reelected than standing up for what's right for our country. And you know, when you look at our history and all the great Americans and patriots of our time, they weren't afraid. They were willing to do what's right for the country, and we need more of that here.
Hey, Lou's right. They pledged it all, and I will tell you this, Gary, it's a little bit inside baseball, and Lou's been here just a little bit longer than I have, but it's hard for folks that buck the trend to rise to the top. The system has a way of just keep on fulfilling those who go along to get along, and for people like me and Lou who have been problematic sometimes in certain committees with certain bills like the border bill, it is tough for us to get up above the fray.
Speaking of the border bill, so I get up this morning, I'm reading the Drudge Report, and I'm reading Judicial Watch, and they're telling us that there's an ISIS camp about 8 miles from the Texas border. There is evidence that there's an ISIS camp there. Yesterday, we had the Senate Homeland Security Committee talking about ISIS, and why would they ever want to come through our southern border? I mean, it's not porous at all, right? We watched people running through last summer hugging border guards, and now they've been sent out to 50 states all over the place from Central America. I'm sitting down during this time and looking what's happening. We watched ISIS at work, or ISIL, if you'd like. We're in Washington here. I guess you have to say ISIL. This past year, and we've seen what they've done. And now we're talking about maybe getting together with drug cartels to start to come into the country. Certainly, a normal, common-sense thinking person has to say, why wouldn't they? And yet we have a person coming up yesterday, the Undersecretary for Homeland Security, saying, well, we think we have it all covered pretty well. It's a 1,900-mile border, but we've got it all covered pretty well. Your thoughts on that, Lou?
Well, I'm sure ISIL is 8 miles from El Paso because the weather is nice. You know, this is
vacationing there.
This is a terrorist group who told us they're coming to America. They want to raise their flag over the White House.
Right downtown here, yep.
And Scott and I sit on a committee that was talking about passing a border bill that would have 90% operational control of the border. So the other 10% that we don't know is not going to be a matter. This defies common sense. We have to protect the American people. That's the number one priority of government, is protect the freedoms of this great country. And we are at war with people that want to come here and steal it from us right here on our own land.
I'm reminded that the Titanic was 90% floatable when it got hit, but the 10% really caused some problems later on, didn't it?
Yeah, that 10% a big deal, and that's why Lou and I were so problematic in the last session with the border bill, because right now it says all people coming across the border will be apprehended, and the bill said we're going to take it back to 90. But even at 100% right now, I think the best estimate is like 40%. So the border is essentially, 50%. Let's give them some deference there, wide open for people like that and others, and that's why securing the border is the number one issue when it comes to immigration reform. We must start there.
Before I move on to any other subjects, what do you do? I mean, what is the step-by-step approach? When someone says the word comprehensive from Washington anymore, my eyes blur over. I glaze. Comprehensive to me is some kind of excuse to push something on a 10-year plan down the road so someone else can deal with it later on. I'm not going to say kick the can down the road because it's too trite. Anyway, my point is, real people, guys that talk common sense like you, what would you do? What is the step-by-step approach right now in getting this thing right?
Gary, this is very difficult. I've been dealing with this for a long time. Number one, we need to secure our borders. Not only our southern border, nearly 50% of the people that come here illegally, they don't cross the border illegally. Right. They come on a visa expires, we can't find them. That's how terrorists get into this country. Until we do that, for me, I don't even want to talk about anything else we're going to do or not do with the people who are here, because when you tell somebody what you're going to do, you're opening a welcome mat for people to rush into America because they know that they're going to get a pathway to citizenship once they get here.
So how do you specifically do that? Securing the borders, that's the line. But then beneath that, how do you specifically go at that?
Well, there's two parts to that.
Go ahead.
Need to secure the border, and we need to enforce the immigration laws that we have. We have immigration laws for good reason, to protect our national security and to protect American jobs. We have violated both of those principles, and we don't have anybody in the White House that's willing to do that, and there's not enough people here in Congress who are willing to say, listen, we're going to enforce our immigration laws for good reason, because not everybody comes to America with good intentions.
Yeah, if we could enforce the laws that we currently have, that would be a great step. But securing the border means absolutely making sure. Look, as a person who served in combat and secured a perimeter, if you want to do it, you can do it. We have to have the will to do it. Secure that border and make sure we know every person that's coming across the border. And just like Lou said, people that are coming in the country on a visa, we must know where they are, what their business is here, when their visa expires, and whether they should be renewed or whether they've got to go back to wherever they've come from. And until we're willing to do that, how do we fix the other issues with visa reform or whatever? Because we really have no idea what the numbers are. We have no idea who's here and what they're doing here.
Let me ask you a question, Scott. I was reading this article this morning about ISIS, and it was just intriguing to me. And I was reading about the testimony yesterday before the Senate Homeland Security Committee. And one of the things that they said was that the drug cartels probably don't want to deal with ISIS, because if ISIS used their routes to come on through here and infiltrate the country, then it would deal a blow to their drug money that they're going to get, and they know that the United States will come at them in a massive way, and they would militarize the borders. So I'm thinking, all right, by absentia right now, what are we doing? We're not doing anything with the borders. It's open right now. Do we militarize the borders? When we talk about security, do we put soldiers on the borders? Do we do on all our borders? I mean, I don't know if we need a whole lot more object lessons out there, that there are bad people in this world who want to knock on our door and kick it down. What are your thoughts?
I'm not an expert on the drug cartels, but it seems to me they're interested in making money. And if they've got a customer, whether it's ISIS or whether it's Scott Perry, they're going to be happy to make some money.
You don't bite the hand that feeds you.
That's exactly right. As far as militarizing the border, we got some issues constitutionally with using the military for what would be considered a law enforcement action. But that aside, Gary, we have the technology and we have the manpower and the heart. The people on the border patrol agents they want to do the job, and they will do the job if we unshackle them and give them the things like that we designate federal lands that are environmentally sensitive right on the border, so that our border patrol can't operate there. Do they think that these coyotes and these drug cartels or ISIS is gonna abide by? They're not going to. So we're tying our own hands. All we can do is untie our own hands, and we can do this.
Well, we need to do. We need to put up some of those no illegal immigration caution signs. That'll stop them right there. Like no drug zones,
right?
No
Exactly.
gun zones. No, they'll start coming across. Oh no!
Yeah, very prohibitive.
Here's a sign. Sure,
got to go back.
Absolutely. One of the things you hear all the time, and I'm sure you've heard it a million times, and people will say to you, what do you do with the people who are here? You probably just want to kick their doors down. That's the normal cliche. You want to kick their doors down and take them out of the country, and then they live here and break up their families. But if we enforce our laws, and these people are there without a job, why are we equating illegal and legal constantly? I know I'm asking the question that's been asked a million times, but I've yet to get the great answer on it.
Well, people always, that's the trick question. What do you do with everyone that's here? That's a trick question, because if you say you're willing to have some kind of pathway to citizenship, what you're doing is you're now telling others around the world, just come here through our open borders, right. Because once you're here, you can provide false documentation to say anything. I've taken down, while I was mayor, our police department took down a fraudulent documentation ring where for $1,500 to $3,000, you can have documents that will say anything you want. We can't go there. That's how do you separate salt from sugar? How do you separate the good people who have crossed the border illegally from the drug cartel, terrorists, people with criminal backgrounds? How do you separate them if we're not going to do face-to-face interviews and find out about your history from your country of origin before we say it's okay to come here to America?
Well, you don't do it with Arizona Law 1062 because that got slapped down by the federal government. They said, listen, we either do something with it, even if we're not doing something with it, you as a state can't. I know your aide is pushing you hard right here, Congressman. Always good to have
Gary.
you in.
Always nice to talk to you.
Thank you so much. And Congressman Ed Mayor Lou Barletta with us here this morning on the Gary Sutton Show. We come back with Congressman Scott Perry, though. And Scott, you look at this whole mess right now that we find ourselves in. I wonder how in good conscience a president, members of Congress can sit back and put their heads in the sand and say that there's not a problem with immigration coming to this country in a bad way. I mean, why do we sit back and we kind of want to say, well, it's immigration reform. Let's bring people out of the shadows. Let's do this. Let's do that. Instead of saying, okay, here's what illegal immigration does to the country. Here's how it depresses wages. Here's what it does to real people. Anything illegal probably is not good for the country.
Right.
This is the only thing that we seem to think illegal is somehow okay, and these people are just working. They just want to come and follow a dream.
I think there are members certainly in Congress that find a way to rationalize illegal behavior and make it somewhat legal because it is, in their opinion, heartless. They see, somebody that was brought here when they're 2 years old, right?
Yep.
And they didn't know any better. I have kids, and I certainly can understand that. And they find a way to rationalize not only for that 2-year-old that was brought here who is now 16, but for their parents and their extended family. And that's the problem. They don't seem to have a filter to be able to determine what is humane and what is obviously just breaking the law. And for the political narrative and political expedience, they throw them all in the same boat and say that anybody that disagrees with them is then heartless and inhumane and like I said, they've rationalized away the Constitution. Regarding the administration, it seems to me that there is a different agenda there. And I hate to be cynical about it, but they're looking to increase their votes. Both sides have their own illegitimate, in my opinion, reason for promoting illegal immigration. But on the side of the president, it seems like he's interested in increasing his electoral pool and the country be damned.
Yeah, and the idea of Republicans many times in there for the cheap labor. And
right.
The cheap labor has undercut the living wage in this country radically. You look at the numbers out there, just in Pennsylvania alone. I know I hit you with this last year,
sure.
But I'll throw it at you again. 180,000 illegal aliens live in Pennsylvania, all right? Illegal aliens cost taxpayers $1.4 billion in our state and local costs. But they only pay an estimated $49 million in taxes collected by the state. They leave a burden of nearly $1.3 billion for Pennsylvania taxpayers to pick up. $560 million in education, $111 million in health care, $74.3 million on justice and law enforcement, $222 million on public assistance. $396 million on government services, general government services. That amounts to a burden of $297 per household headed by a U.S. citizen.
By U.S. citizens that's here working legitimately, making tough decisions for their family, picking and choosing based on priorities, not getting the things that they want for the things that they need to have, like a roof over their head and food on the table. And wouldn't it be great coming into a state budget season if we had that money at our disposal to pay for law enforcement and health care and so on and so forth, but we don't have it because it's being taken from us.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to just talk to you very quickly about Iran, news on that yesterday, and also Cuba. We've got some new news on Cuba out there as well, and maybe a little bit more on immigration, too. Congressman Scott Perry, kind enough to stop by with us here this morning on the Gary Sutton Show on News Radio 910 WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show. Just a couple of minutes yet with Congressman Scott Perry here as we come to you live from the Hold Their Feet to the Fire event sponsored by FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Scott, victory of sorts yesterday for the Congress, at least for the Senate, coming out 19-0 on their committee to say we have a role to play here in this whole Iran deal. Your thoughts?
It's a shame that they had to go to that. I mean, the Constitution clearly states advise and consent for treaties, and this is certainly an agreement as a treaty. I think it's very telling that the president all day long was saying that he was going to veto a bill, but when it came out 19-0, that's indicative of the override power of the Congress. And then he said, well, okay, now I'll take a look at it. You're darn right you'll take a look at it because we're going to override your veto. And that's worse than the situation, So it's working as it's supposed to. It's just a shame that we have to do it this way.
Well, you ought not be pushing the envelope of the Constitution all the time. And remember when we were kids, when you had a bully, you punched him in the nose and he stepped back. Final thought, President also yesterday pulled the terrorist affiliation off Cuba. Congress may have something to say about that yet, even though Cuba supposedly hasn't done anything with terrorists for about 6 months, but they have terrorists living on their island. I'm wondering what that's going to be all about.
Yeah, 6 months, certainly. First of all, I don't believe that's true. Second of all, that's not enough time for people like me and I think most Americans. And finally, I would like to know the administration's rationale. I'd like to see the rationale.
Well, the Cubans told them that they're not going to do that.
We would like to see something a little more than that. So we will be taking measures in Congress to deal with that very shortly, I guarantee you.
Well, I know you're heading off. They have a car waiting for you out front to get to a committee meeting. That's the kind of thing you have to do right now. Congressman, always great having you on the show.
My privilege as always, Gary.
Thank you, Scott. Take care. And Congressman Scott Perry with us here on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA as we come to you live from the Federation of American Immigration Reform event. Hold Their Feet to the Fire right here. And if you missed my original thought this morning, we have a little problem right now with the Cuban situation. And I was reading this article this morning. It was really kind of interesting. It says the president's, this was in the Daily Beast, the president's trolling of Cuba defending Republicans ought to result in mockery, not outrage. Because the real problem with the Obama administration's approach to normalization with Cuba isn't the normalization itself. It's that this normalization came without getting the United States any of their long-stated policy priorities for the Cuban people in return. Normalization is President Obama's gift to the Castro regime, a gift with no strings attached. In other words, we're not getting anything out of this. This is not coincidentally the same problem we see with the administration's approach to what else? To negotiations with Iran, with far more at stake, by the way, of course. And in both cases, an avowed enemy of the United States is handed a huge strategic concession by the Americans in exchange for what amounts to what? Nothing. This article goes on to say in the Daily Beast today, unilateral sanctions on Cuba have been oppressive and largely ineffective. And that's why the public largely supports lifting them. But rolling them back should have come through what? The normalization process in a little thing called Congress. And it should have come in return for tangible reforms in Cuba. Yeah. The government in Cuba is best understood as a cross between violent and left-wing radicals and organized crime. That's essentially what it is. And we are normalizing our relations with them now for what exactly? What's the reason? So agricultural interests can make a buck. So academic leftists can check off a wish list item. Letting Cuba off the hook should be presumably an opportunity to prod the nation toward reforms that benefit its people and American interests. But President Obama will have none of it. By pursuing another misguided unilateral policy, it goes on to say in this Daily Beast article, he has squandered an opportunity to encourage freedom on the island and open up trade relations at the same time. What does the United States get in return for this overture? Do we get normalization of the status of Guantanamo? Do we get our fugitives back so they can face justice? Does Cuba apologize for any of its support for terrorism? Does Cuba have to render justice or accountability for shooting down American civilian aircraft in international airspace as it did in 1996? Do meaningful number of Cuban political prisoners get released? Does Cuban social and political repression ease one iota? Does Cuban support for radicalism and violence abroad cease? Does a Cuban communist grip on power and society relax even slightly? Does America receive Cuban support or even neutrality on any issue over which Cuba was previously opposed? Does Cuba concede a single item of strategic value or tactical value? The answer to every single one of these questions is no. And that's where we stand right now. So again, as we look at this whole Cuban situation, once again, the Congress might have something to say about all this before it's all said and done.